Welcome to today's conversation, where we delve into the critical topic of workplace investigations and conflict resolution. And joining us today is Melisa Kappely. She's a highly experienced professional from Interpeople's Investigations and Conflict Resolution team. Melisa brings a wealth of expertise to this field, helping organisations navigate some of their most challenging moments with integrity and skill. And with a unique qualification held only by a select few in New Zealand, Melisa is at the forefront of this specialised area, providing guidance on sensitive workplace issues. So welcome, Melisa.
Thanks, Suzi.
Let's dive straight in. Tell us about workplace investigations. What is actually involved exactly?
Sure. So look, investigations in the workplace are generally undertaken because an organisation has an allegation from an employee and they need to know what's happened. So they're a result of, often if it's an independent, it's a serious allegation, and the organisation needs to bring in someone independent to find out what's happened. The reasons for investigations can be varied. It could be bullying, it could be sexual harassment, or it could be just a breakdown in relationships between individuals or within teams.
So tell us a little bit more about some of these reasons. You said that sometimes it's about bullying or an allegation of sexual harassment. Those seem pretty self-explanatory. Tell us a bit more about conflict between two people. Can you give us some examples of what that might look like?
Yeah, I think in organisations, often there's a breakdown or start of a breakdown in a relationship between either individuals or between within a team. And I think if it's not dealt with quickly by the organisation, then often it can escalate to a point where people feel that it's serious. And at that point, they get to the stage of making a formal complaint, which often a formal complaint is a serious allegation that then goes to independent investigation.
So tell us a little bit more about when we should use your services, if I'm a leader or an organisation, and when shouldn't we?
Yeah. So I think to use an independent investigation, often the allegations are quite serious, and they require the serious response to what the complaint is. I think it is important to use often an impartial person, so someone who doesn't have a relationship with the existing people. Often as a manager or a leader, as an internal person, and have a relationship with those people. So often an external investigator will bring a degree of independence. It may be also that you do need someone who is trained and credible so that they can follow the key principles of an investigation. Or it may be that you don't have the internal resources or expertise to carry out an investigation, because they are time consuming.
Speaking on that, how long does an investigation take? I know as long as it takes, and it would vary quite a bit. Can you give us a bit more information about the process?
Yeah, so the process itself is once there's a decision to, let's say we're in this situation engaging an independent investigator, then you're agreeing with the organisation, which often the individuals will see, but the terms of reference. So you're understanding the scope of the investigation and what it is that you're actually looking into. From there, once you've scoped it, it is about planning who you're going to meet, who are going to be the witnesses, what order of the witnesses, what information you collect. So the evidence may be interviews, it may be emails, it may be CCTV. There's a range of things that you're looking at. So you're planning the evidence to understand the facts of what's happened. And then I think in terms of the cost, it does come down to the complexity, but also the amount of witnesses that are involved. If it's a he shows, she shows with a couple of people involved, it can be a simpler process. If there's multiple witnesses, evidence, then it can become extended and take a reasonable amount of time and resources and money to undertake the investigation.
I'm really intrigued about how you got into this, because you've held senior roles in the HR field. You're the owner of a broad HR and recruitment firm. How did you get into this? And tell us a bit more about this unique qualification that you have.
Sure. So I think for me personally, it's interesting work. It can often be complex, but also the complex and challenging make it interesting. So I think getting into it for me was about not only the complexity, but also if you complete a good investigation, you know you've got a robust report and you've made an accurate finding. Presenting that back to the business really feels as though they're able to digest that and move forward with their actions. So you do feel like you're making a difference to businesses if you can produce a robust, and when you do produce a robust report. In terms of the qualifications, so often people will call themselves investigators, but in terms of, it is important that people are trained and that they are, I suppose, sticking to a set of principles. So I was trained by the Association of Workforce Investigators, which is a global association. Myself and my colleague Marianne went to Texas to complete our qualification. So belonging to Workplace Investigators, or AWI, they have a purpose of promoting and enhancing good quality impartial investigations. So we completed that, and they provide continuous education, which might be about reducing bias, how to bring AI into investigations. So they are part of our continuing education. Also in New Zealand, you actually need to be licensed as a private investigator.
So are you licensed as a private investigator? I did notice your badge. Actually, I have to say, I do like that.
So we have, and into people here, we have 3 private licensed investigators. So New Zealand has, in terms of recent cases, looked to ensure that either lawyers or people with AWI qualifications are the people who are put forward to complete independent investigations.
I can see why it would be so important to have that qualification, that level of quality assurance and that objectivity. Just carrying on from the objectivity, so are you normally engaged in this work by the organisation?
So
Does that mean, though, that sometimes have you ever felt pressure, given it's the organisation who's paying for you, pressure to kind of rule in their favour, or what sort of pressures do you get?
So it is the employer who engages us and also pays our invoices, so you are engaged by them. I think that's what it becomes so important about the ethics of being a workplace investigator. You know, through the qualifications and principles under AWI that we need to adhere to, it's very much about being impartial, being objective, reducing, bias. So I think if you're a good investigator who has a qualification and you stick by the principles and the ethics, then you're not looking to be in favour of the employer. Our objective is to do a thorough, robust fact-finding exercise, and that doesn't always go in favour of the employer.
Yeah. It makes me think about how important those ethics and values and processes are important in your line of work, but they're also super important in leadership in general. It makes me think about the importance of values acting as your true north, and in this case, if you have those principles and processes in place and those values and ethics, that will come through. And just as a segue, I used to be a little bit derisive of organisational values. I think I had walked into one too many shiny reception areas in large corporates with, the plaque on the wall of here are my values, but you walk around the rooms and the hallways and nobody's practicing them. But I've kind of changed my mind a little bit when it comes to values, and not only organisational values, but the importance of leaders understanding and defining their own leadership values. So, for example, and it's one of the areas that we delve into on the Leaders Map, Emerging Leaders Program, is understanding and defining your own your leadership values. Now, one of my values is whānau first, and I thought that was pretty obvious to me, and it has been obvious to me, and I thought, lots of times I have led by that. But it's often when the rubber hits the road, when you've got a really difficult decision, that values really matter. And an example of that was I've been working with a wonderful long-term client, and they had approached me with the opportunity to do a piece of work. Now, this was really exciting work. It was financially lucrative. It ticked all the boxes. Except for one thing, it meant that I was going to have to be travelling a lot more often than I do already, and I travel a lot for work, as does my husband. And when they were approaching me about this work, something didn't feel quite right. And so I said, look, can I have some time to think about it? And that evening, I realised that the reason why I wasn't gung-ho for it was that it was actually against my value of whānau first. I've got a 15-year-old at home, and anyone who has teenagers knows that, they say they don't need you, but they really do. And I knew that by accepting this piece of work, I wasn't living by my value of whānau first. And so I declined the piece of work. And the moment that I did, it felt like the right choice. So I wanted to delve in a little bit about values. I mean, that's an example of personal leadership values, but organisational values are really important too. So tell me more about that, and what are your values, and how do you see that, or, your organisational values are into people, and how does that play out?
So values, I think, are probably with you in that it's an overused word, and often, we've always talked about, people come up with values, put them on the wall, and then never refer to them. And so I think values have got a bad rap, if you like, in terms of what they mean. I think if we strip it back, what are they? They're certain behaviours that we expect from ourselves as leaders and from everyone within the organisation, and we all need to align up. And I think if you get a value that really is right for your organisation and right for your people, and you live by that in everything you do, then it can have a certainly significant positive influence within your organisation. Often we see organisations keep to their values when it's easy, but then when it's hard, the values seem to disappear because it doesn't quite fit in with what they want to do, which your client's a good example. Yeah. Do you keep with that client because you want the revenue, but actually it doesn't quite feel right, but you stick with it and it's not quite aligned. So I think values or behaviours are really important. When times get tough is really where you'll see an organisation.
And I reckon you mentioned that often if they'd followed the values, you might not have been in this position. Yeah. So I wonder, do you often find that if you were to look at the organisational values and then look at a situation that somewhere along the line those values haven't been followed either by either party?
And if we look at some of the ones that are commonly used around, let's take respect, that seems to be a common value that organisations use. So, if often when we talked about going into organisations, if everyone respected everyone, then would that would that relationship have broken down? Well, the answer is probably no. Yeah. But people have watched this relationship deteriorate, these people not respecting one another. But where's the leader in terms of, stepping forward into that situation and saying, it is about respect. You need to respect one another and let's work through it. So that's just a common example where people use honesty or respect. In terms of interpeople, so we certainly have a set of values. Our overall purpose is that better people make a better business, makes a better community, makes a better world. And when we talk about that, we have, we're putting people into roles. So we want to make sure that, and there's nothing like a feeling of putting in someone really good into an organisation, that you're making a difference to that organisation. Or it might be actually where we have an individual who isn't fitting into that organisation, they're not demonstrating the values, and we need to work with that business to exit the individual in a very fair and transparent way. But if we can help that organisation, and often even that individual, move forward, then that's really important.
It's almost like full circle in some ways.
So it is about, for us, it's about working with the employer to make a better people and better businesses and better communities from there. In terms of our values, look, we have a set of values from being connected, forge the unbreakable, own it, achieve it. And one of the ones that sits with us is be connected and never drink alone. So that's a bit of a different one. But we're often dealing with complex situations. We're dealing with difficult situations, and it can get hard and lonely working through them. So we're always very mindful of those people and helping one another. And no matter what you've got on, take the time and spend some time with that individual to help guide them through it. So,
well, I can say actually that you do live this value, because the interactions that I've had with you and the team over the years has really, I've seen that in action. So bravo to you, you are actually living it. One final question. So let's say I'm a senior leader in an organisation, and within my broader team, there is a situation such as there's been some accusations, there's some, extreme conflict, sexual harassment, workplace bullying. It's come up through HR or the people function. What would be the process or the first steps that I should take first, and or engaging with somebody or a services such as yours?
So as I said, we need to lean into those situations if we're aware, and I obviously aim to deal with it before it gets too serious, but there's obvious one-off situations. I think if you are looking, you'll make a decision whether you want to manage this internally or externally, and taking into those things about can the intern person be impartial, do they have relationships with these people, do we need someone who's fully trained? So I think you will consider a number of matters whether you decide to use your internal, for example, HR team, or go external. But a number of what you've just described around, sexual harassment and a whole range of things, I think you'd be wanting to seek an external, independent person. And as I said, the AWI members or people who are trained is available to access those people, and choosing an investigator that you think has the training and the credibility and the expertise, and engaging and agreeing the scope of work with them. And often that can be, maybe to guide and support you as a leader, or maybe to take an investigation. So there's a range of options that your external person can help you work through and give you the support as a leader that you need to guide you through those situations.
Yeah, even having somebody walk beside you and give you some guidance and direction and expertise. I know, if I was a leader in that situation, I would find that really useful. What do you find most challenging about this? Because, for me, naturally, I don't particularly like conflict. I think over the years, I've got a lot more comfortable with conflict. I know from a leadership perspective, it's part of the job, but it probably wouldn't be something that I would lean into like you have. So I know for me, if I was doing your job, being right in the midst of this huge level of conflict would not be my cup of tea, but maybe you're different. So what do you find really challenging about the job?
I think one of the challenging things when you're going into an organisation and working for a leader is that people have already made an assumption about who did what. And because they know the people, they've probably watched the scenario potentially play out if it's not a one-off, and already people are making decisions or assumptions about who did what. So I think that's always really challenging, because for us as investigators, it's not about bias. We're going in, we're doing the fact-finding exercise. We are giving everyone the same amount of respect and confidentiality. There's always a complainant or complainants and a respondent. Everyone, though, is treated equally with privacy and confidentiality, because at that point, we actually don't know what's happened.
Yeah.
We don't know if it's, if what the complainant's saying is accurate, actually, if it's not. So it's really about not making any assumptions, having no bias, and really going in there to collect the evidence to find a robust finding. But it is difficult if people have already, or leaders have already jumped to a conclusion about what's happened within that situation.
Absolutely. It's sort of, it's not innocent until proven guilty, but it can be, the opposite. And it is another area, I guess, where we have that unconscious bias, where we have what we call that fundamental attribution error, where we already assign that to people. So I can see how important that is. What have you really enjoyed about it? I mean, that can be quite challenging, but you've already alluded to it. But what do you find most satisfying and valuable about the process?
I think is when we come to a conclusion in terms of what happened, and we feel very comfortable with that conclusion because we've collected the evidence to support it. Often, sometimes we'll be asked just to do a fact-finding exercise, sometimes a fact-finding with recommendations. Not so much on the, if you like, if there's disciplinary action to be taken, but what are the things in this situation that could improve the working relationships? So being able to present the findings and then a set of initiatives that we may recommend, which may be a restorative conflict process, that may be coaching, but giving the organisation the outcome of what's happened and the evidence to support that, and then here are some things to be able to move forward. That's the satisfying bit, because if you believe, better people make better workplaces and you can make a better workplace, then that ultimately is what you're achieving.
It leads it nicely to my next question, because what do you see as some of the common mistakes that leaders and organisations make, either during the process or even beforehand? It's almost in some ways that you're the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff sometimes. What are some of the most common mistakes that you see organisations and leaders make?
I think when they break down the relationships or conflict in relationships, it's often got to a point that becomes quite serious and is escalated. I think if leaders, one of the common things is you often think when you're in there, actually, if someone 3 months ago had seen this relationship breaking down and taken, and looked at it, and they could have taken another set of initiatives, which may have been restorative, it may be coaching, a range of behaviours or behavioural sort of initiatives that would have potentially dealt with the issue there.
Yep.
But the leader hasn't leaned into it, and then it's got more serious and different situations till it gets escalated. So for leaders, it is about leading in early where there are workplace issues, and dealing with those issues. Now, some are one-off serious, so I'm excluding them, but there is often a pattern of behaviours that have happened over a period of time that haven't been addressed. As I said, the other mistake for leaders is assuming you know who's in the right and who's in the wrong, if you like, and making those assumptions. Also, not using someone independent and using someone internal who has an existing relationship with the people who are involved. And then one that we commonly see is not following your own set of rules. So if you've got policies and procedures around investigations or around how this should be managed, we need to always go back and look at agreements and policies and procedures to be able to guide us through the process that we take. So that would be some of the common things that we see.
I can see there's a couple of things I want to delve into on that. One is this sense of not nipping it in the bud, waiting until it escalates or grows before you address it. And I think it's something, having worked with lots of leaders, that it is a common mistake. I know that often we would rather put our head in the sands, having those difficult conversations or leaning into conflict or tough situations. It's understandable that you'd rather not do it, but it really does talk to this idea that if we can nip things in the bud, if we can, as you say, lean in and address things before they become really big, look for patterns, if there is those early patterns, to delve with it. And I love this whole thing about having policies and processes, but nobody actually following them. I often say if you ever want anybody not to do anything, just shove it on the intranet and leave it at that. So I wonder if there's a piece around not only having the policies and processes to deal with situations like this, but also involving and talking about those policies and induction and leadership training, and really making sure that leaders in the organisation know the importance of these and what will happen if we don't follow it, which is really good. Soapbox moment. If I gave you a soapbox right now, what would you say to leaders in organisation when it comes to this line of work?
I think, look, it's, you've got a set of values often, and policies and processes. Really live your values, and we've just touched on that. If you've got values about respect, honesty, transparency, then live them in your workplace to ensure that you don't get, these serious, if you like, investigations occurring. So really reinforcing that deal with issues as they arise. Do not assume what's going on and what you know, who's right, who's wrong. Do not make assumptions. Often it's about really bringing someone independent to talk and understand the evidence. So don't assume because you know that person, this is how they've seen that's what's actually occurring. And then, as I said, follow your own rules. I mean, they're the kind of three things that I always see: not leaning in, not sort of following your own values and policies, and making assumptions are things that leaders need to be aware of.
That's really great. Is there anything else that you think that we haven't covered here that you think is really important that you've learned by doing this work, either about workplaces in general? Perhaps there are some other things that have informed your work in other parts. Anything else that you think is really important?
I think once I think, you do an independent investigation, it changes the workplace because it's a formal process. Often if you're at the formal end, it's a formal process, and it's quite hard to come back from that if you have provided witness statements from the complainant to the respondent. It does have an impact on the working relationship, and it's timely, it's costly, it's not good on on those relationships. So I think for me it is about, there is a set of initiatives as leaders we really need to live our values and step into them, and really make sure that we look after those workplace relations moving.
So you mentioned earlier that this can have a huge impact on a team. It's pretty serious, and so my question is, can a team or the participants involved or the people involved recover from this? Or is it often a case where you've had an investigation that one of the parties needs to be moved from the team?
So in civil, I think the team can recover, but it needs to be well thought out. I think when the investigations are complete and the findings are made, and as an investigator, we are required to make a finding. So once that finding's made, then thinking about that finding, how it's communicated, and what are the steps to bring that team to move forward. Now, if everyone following that investigation is to remain within the workplace, then how do you repair those relationships? So the answer is it's not easy. It can be done, but it doesn't stop at the investigation in terms of the findings. It may be that team need to go through some restorative work, or the individuals involved, that there's coaching for certain individuals. Sometimes people are moved into different roles or into different departments. So there's a number of initiatives that need to be looked at. And as I said, the team can recover, but it needs to be well thought out with a good set of initiatives on how to achieve that.
Yeah, that makes sense. You said one of the biggest traps that you see leaders fall into and organisations fall into is this assuming that somebody is either innocent or guilty, or making assumptions about what has gone on. How do you stop that in yourself? Because that must be, in some levels, a tendency of being human. So what do you do to ensure that you don't fall into that same trap yourself?
Yeah, so with that, I think it's really, our role is to collect facts and evidence to support what, the finding that we're looking, or we make. So for us, it is very important at the start not to have any biases, not to take on board what people are saying. Our role is to collect the evidence and then make our findings on that evidence. And we need to show how we've come to that finding. So it very much is about focusing on the evidence, is collecting as much relevant evidence as you can from people who have direct observation or can contribute valuably to that investigation. So it's really focusing on what are the facts, what are the evidence, and based on that, what is the finding. And you need to be able to support the finding that you make and be credible in the finding that you've made.
It must be quite interesting or challenging to be asking such probing and sensitive questions, and people must be really afraid a lot of the time. You must be dealing with people who on some level had quite strong emotions, anger, fear. How important is it for you to, within the realms of the fact that it's investigation, build trust, and how do you try and make people feel comfortable enough?
And that is setting it up in terms of planning and being very transparent with people about that, we're going to have this, these are the type of questions I'm going to ask you, making sure obviously they've got support people if they need, ensuring that they understand what is going to happen with the information that they provide. And we will, for example, once we've taken a statement from a witness or the complainant or the respondent, we provide that back for them to check that it's accurate. So there's the steps of being very transparent, talking through the process so that they understand it. They understand and get to check the accuracy of what we're considering, and they understand who that information. So it is around, again, openness, fairness, transparency, and being available to answer the questions that they have, because it can be a very challenging process for everyone involved.
You talk about, openness, honesty, transparency. They're kind of really important things in leadership in general. So it's really interesting that when you talk about the process of something that is really at the pointy end of difficult situations, and in this line of work, that they're also really important in leadership in general and building trust. I'm really curious, is this line of work growing? And if so, what's driving that growth, if that is the case?
I think it is growing, but I think there's a range of initiatives growing. And when I say that, I think as leaders are understanding that they need to lean into issues and deal with issues. And when people come to us with a workplace issue, like we've been talking about, it's about talking about the different options, whether it's doing a team culture survey, whether it's doing coaching or restorative through to investigations. So I think as more leaders lean into dealing with workplace issues, the initiatives that are required to support them are growing. But so we're certainly hoping to see growth in all of those initiatives, just not investigations at that more, more serious formal end of it. So we're encouraging leaders to move and look at their different initiatives, and if they do, deal with it earlier than coming through in some of those more proactive ones.
Great. Thank you so much. I feel like I've got lots more questions to ask, but I know that there will be a lot of questions asked by readers and listeners to the Leaders Digest. So actually, if you've got some questions that you would like to ask Melisa, make sure you put some comments below and we'll see if we can answer them in the comments. Thanks very much.